Hey everybody, Todd Sharp here. I want to talk about my pedal, the VTL D1 vacuum tube loop driver for a minute and explain a few things. A lot of people ask me, why do I need something like this today with all the better quality pedals that are being made? And basically, here's the answer. This is all about what you bump your guitar pickup up to, what your pickup sees. So, this is a long discussion and I don't want to be too deep into the technical aspects of it, but I'm going to cover a few basics real quick to try and talk about why we build these and why you should have one if you really care about your tone and your dynamics and your touch. So, almost everybody plays electric guitar with high impedance pickups. And if you play tube guitar amps, which most guitar players like to play, what your pickup sees when you plug straight into an amp is usually a 12AX7 or a vacuum tube of some kind, and it's got a super high impedance. It's also being run at a very high voltage, and the guitar reacts to that just all on its own. There's a certain dynamic and touch and response that transfers to your fingerboard when you plug straight into a tube. And that changes when you plug into a bunch of, get a shot here of all the pedals, what I'll, affectionately call toys, which is kind of what they are, right? So when you go through a bunch of pedals before you ever get to your amp, your pickup is actually having a different reaction. Now, those who maybe understand some of the theory behind this might argue that, well, you can actually create a high impedance input. Let's look at this little guy right down here. It looks like a little bug. You can get a high impedance input that will receive a guitar out of one of these. This is a modern op amp. You can see how big that is compared to this 9-volt battery. And you can get a lot of gain out of them too. They're actually kind of incredible. There's a bunch of transistors inside of that. They're amazing devices and they can do a lot of things. But some of the difference here is that you're running that with one of these or an external supply, but the standard for all that is 9 volts. And I'm going to talk about some theory real quick. Let's look over here at this deal. So here's a typical op amp circuit being run by 9 volts, and the way that typically gets wired up without getting too deep into the weeds is that you can obtain a signal swing at the output of maybe 2 volts. And you don't need 2 volts to drive an amplifier input. We like gain devices and things like that. But why am I mentioning the difference? So there's 2 volts you can get out of an op amp, run off of a 9-volt battery. Over here is a vacuum tube circuit, which inside of this guy is being run with a power supply of about 110 volts DC. We got 55 volts here. You can swing an output of about 30 volts peak to peak or around 11 volts RMS. Again, you don't need 11 volts to drive your guitar amp input. The difference being the same thing as like driving a car. I often make that analogy. So, you can go 80 miles an hour in a Kia on the freeway, or you can go 80 miles an hour in a Maserati on the freeway. And there's a major difference. They both are going to do the same thing, but if you're sitting in the seat and with your hands on the wheel in a Maserati with all that horsepower and a car that'll do 220 miles an hour, and when you just touch the gas pedal, it's a whole feel, it's a whole experience of driving. The end result may be the same. You're going to go 80 miles an hour. But that's kind of what we're talking about here. There's a feel and a dynamic and a touch. When you're plugged into a tube first, you're going to have a certain kind of dynamic that you're never going to get with a 9-volt battery and solid-state electronics. Here's a tube. There's another thing about tubes. Let's get a nice close-up of this tube. This is a 12AX7. It's inside of a glass bottle. You can see about the size of it. It's kind of huge compared to modern electronics. There's 3 elements in there. They have different metallic structure. They're coated with different chemical structures. They're shaped in different ways. They're juxtaposed to each other just so inside of a sealed glass vacuum that's heated up with heaters. The temperature at the cathode, which is the element that emits electrons inside of a tube, gets extremely hot right there, almost 1,000 degrees. So think about that physically, about the physics of what's going on here. This is what your guitar is going through instead of a toy being driven off a 9-volt battery. And what happens is the cathode gets so hot it throws electrons, which are attracted to the plate, which has a high voltage on it. And there's an element called a grid in between those two. The grid controls the amplitude of that electron flow. That's how a tube amplifies. It actually does it with what's known as a space charge inside of a vacuum. That's where your guitar, that's where the magic happens in a vacuum tube, is with space charge. You can almost see it, how it works, as opposed to a silicon transistor-controlled device, which is a whole different technology, and it's part of what makes tubes and transistors and solid-state electronics so different from each other, and why we have this ongoing debate about tubes, whether it's guitar players or hi-fi enthusiasts, you know, who can hear the difference, or studio gear. Vacuum tubes have a thing, and that's part of the technology in the simplest way I can think to explain it of why. That's why we make this. So this, your guitar plugs into this guy, and we have a bypass button. Goes straight into your amp. So there's nothing between the guitar and the amp but the 2 cords and a relay inside here. So you've always got your straight signal to compare your, what I call your true north. That's what plugging straight in sounds like. Then you activate the circuitry. You have a tube amplifier with a level control. To hit a send jack, you plug this into all your effects pedals. You come back from your effects pedals into the return jack, another tube stage with its own gain control. There's a high frequency trim control for all of this. This is an effects loop for all your pedals. So your guitar's seeing a tube first. It's being conditioned to drive a bunch of pedals to recover them. You can adjust gains on both ends. And in addition to that, you have a really great sounding vacuum tube boost circuit with its own level and tone control, and a mute tune button so you can tune up, mute your signal, and you don't even have to plug through a tuner. So this is all about treating your guitar pickup. You know, if you want the best tone, touch, and response you can get, then this guy's for you. Thanks.